Welcome back to House of Sky and Breath. We are on chapters 38 through 56. Let's get into it. First off, Bryce, Ethan, and Therian go to visit the Mystics, okay? If you've ever seen the movie, I believe it's called Minority Report with Tom Cruise, where there's like those weird oracle being, three of them like are in like these little tubs or pods or something, and they like tell the future or something. Essentially, think that is basically what the Mystics are. They're just veneer creatures who have some gift to like see stuff or something ish. So there's three of them. There's a female, a male, and one that's both. And that's how it always is with Mystics. I guess you need all three. The guy who owns these Mystics, I guess, if you want to call it that, he just tells them that they can call him the Astronomer. He's kind of a creepy looking dude. And he's got these rings on his fingers that glow, and then when they get a closer look, they see little hands hit the glass or whatever you want to call like the gem of his rings, and then they realize that these are fire sprites trapped in the rings, and Bryce is mortified because all she can think of is Lahaba. So devastating, but one thing at a time. They are here to ask questions, even though Bryce tried to convince Therian and Ethan 10 million times not to go, because Hunt told them not to go. During the investigation with Danica, he was like, nah, we ain't going to the Mystics, we don't need it, and so they didn't. And so Bryce was like, guys, this is a stupid idea. So the entire time that they were there, she's like, this is stupid, we should not be here. And then by the end of it, Therian and Ethan agree, but it takes them a while to get there because Ethan's there because he wants to know about Connor, obviously. Always about Connor, fair. And Therian's there because he needs to know about Emil. So these Mystics, I guess what they do is they float in these like salty water tubs all the time. They're connected to some machines. And when they are not working, I guess, they kind of can float wherever. And they're basically their own version of Google. They're the internet themselves. They can just float amongst the cosmos and go find answers about things and talk to beings across literally the universe as they will. And then they do that same thing when they're being charged for their services. So they just, have a specific question that they're looking for usually. So Ethan pays a lot of gold, and he asks his question first. What happened to Connor Holstrom? Is he in the bone quarter? Is he okay? So they get up, their whole little machine working, blah, blah, blah. They start going. Everyone really is not loving this astronomer dude. The male mystic gets an answer or like goes to hell, literally the planet of hell. And they're like, why on earth is he going there? And then Ethan's worried. He's like, oh my gosh, how did Connor end up there? Like, he better not be there in hell. And he starts asking around, and he asks like, hey, I have some questions, will you answer them? And then unfortunately, so they have a screen that like will read out what's happening in the Mystics conversation for them. Real unfortunate. Who he finds none other than the Prince of the Ravine, who I don't remember the exact order of all of them, but I think this might be the 6th prince. So you have Adis is the Prince of the Chasm, number 5, and then you have Apollyon, who's the Prince of the Pit, who's 7, and I think Prince of the Ravine is 6, but it could be 4, I don't know. Either way, his name is Thanatos, and he starts talking. And then actually he just kind of takes over the Mystic and then talks to them. He like pops up on the screen itself and starts talking to the group themselves and the astronomer and everybody. They're like, ah, not great. Nobody wants to be talking to these princes, okay? So then he's like, oh, I know who you are. And then he's like, wait a minute, you killed my pet, my informant, the shepherd. He's been dutifully reporting to me everything that happens in the bone quarter and all that he hears over there, and now you killed him. And Bryce is like, sorry, I guess. I didn't want to be lunch. So then he's like, I'll answer your questions because a formidable warrior who kills my pet, you deserve some answers, but just know if we're ever on a battlefield, I will kill you in vengeance for the shepherd. So no, there is no Connor Holstrom here. What happened before the shepherd died is that he was still there in the bone quarter, and an order was dispatched from the dark to leave him and the others alone until the usual time has passed. So then they're like, who issued it? And he's like, I don't know. And then he doesn't know about a meal or anything. He's like, I don't care about these. And then he's like, you know what? I'm hungry. I'm gonna feast now on this mystic. So then he starts trying to like I don't know, eat, attack, do something to the Mystics. Then the Mystics' body's like spasming in the water, and there's like ice that like is creeping over the tub, and it's creeping to the other Mystics as well, their tubs. And so then they're like, do something, and the astronomer's like, I can't rip them out without like the proper order of things and precautions. And Ethan's like, screw this, so he just leaps the barrier that they were on over into the tub, rips the dude out with his respirator, whatever, saves him, and then goes to the next tubs and starts ripping them out, rips them all out. The astronomer, livid, screaming at him, and he's like, get out! Like, absolutely not. I can't believe you just touched my stuff. Don't do this again. And when Ethan had ripped out the female out of her tank, she was just like, send me back! Send me back! And then he's like, oh, sorry. And so then they leave, and they're like, geez. Bryce is like, I told you that was a freaking bad idea. And Theory and Ethan were like, you know what? Yeah, you were right. It was a bad idea. Ethan's still not happy about Connor because he still doesn't really know what's happening to him. So he's still worried. Meanwhile, we cut over to Hunt, who, as if you remember, he's basically grounded for 2 weeks. He's not allowed to leave the comitium, whatever, except for on official 33rd business. So he is just, you know, trying to distract himself, work. Bryce doesn't tell him about the Mystics because she didn't want to tell him over the phone, so she's gonna save that for when she sees him later. Or so she thinks. She doesn't know yet that he's grounded. But anyway, he is showing Baxian around, and then he is like, okay, fine, I'll be nice to him, I'll throw him a bone, basically. So he's like, Baxian, let's play some video games, let me show you how it's done. And Baxian's like, I've never played a video game. He's like, oh, I know. Absolutely schools him, whatever, but Baxian likes it, so they're having fun. And then we cut later over to him in his barracks, in his room, and he's on the phone with Bryce, and he's explaining that he can't leave, and he's grounded, basically, blah, blah, blah. And then their phone talk turns into a little bit more than just talk, and I'll leave it there. And then after that, it's been a week now. A week goes by. Bryce is still trading with Cormac and Runes there to try to teleport. He's like, just teleport. It's just like folding a piece of paper and you're now going from this part to this part because they're one and the same, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, that doesn't make sense. It's not working. He's like, it's fine. Maybe you just can't do it. She's like, no, I'm pretty sure I can do it. It's just not working yet. Then they get a call from Declan and he's like, hey, my program that's been running for like weeks now finally finished scrubbing all of the footage from Jezebel's gallery, and I found something that's got Danica, like the whatever thing that they were looking for. So they're like, perfect. So they show up and he's like, hey, look, there's a specific day that Danica's chilling with you in the gallery, whatever, and then you and Lahaba leave because Bryce knew that Lahaba and Danica did not like each other, so she takes Lahaba with her up the stairs somewhere. Danica waits for them to leave, and then she sprints to a bookshelf, looks at a book that it's like she knew where it was and was eyeing it, opens it, flips like 1 or 2 pages, sees it, puts it back, and that's it. So they zoom in on the footage, find the name of the book. It's like some wolf lineage book. So then Bryce is like, what the heck? So they're all confused. Like, I don't know why Danica would have wanted to look into this, whatever. But Jezebel's the one that set them on this path of this lead, being like, do you even know why Danica always came to the gallery, sort of deal. So, as Bryce is going back to work, she calls Jezebel and is like, hey. She's like, actually, she asks Jezebel, she's like, hey, so I looked at that footage, like, you hinted at, can I please have this book? And she's like, you're so demanding, but then she sends the book anyway. And so then they look at it, and it's got, like, the whole wolf line all the way, like, 15,000 years ago, like, basically predating the Asteri, or, like, right at the beginning of the Asteri. And then it shows, like, the page that Danica would have been looking at is the very start of the Fendir line. So they're like, weird. Unsure what this has to do with anything. So then Bryce is like, okay, I'm gonna sneak into the den when Sabine's not there. She makes Declan and Rune or whoever distract Sabine so that it could guarantee Sabine would not be there. And so she goes and talks to the Prime himself, the Prime of the Wolves. And so she shows up and she's like, hello. And he's like, Bryce, a wolf. And she's like, she was told that he had said that at the summit, but hearing it again to her face, she's like, oh, I love this old man. Anyway, she asks her questions, whatever, and he explains that their first ancestors are largely forgotten and that they were never written in history books, like explicitly, they were only passed down verbally. And he then like kind of talks about how Danica was writing a paper, but he never got to hear about this paper because she had asked about these ancestors once. And then he talks about how he had been told by his grandfather about how wolves used to be at like some certain level of awesomeness or something, and then the Asteri came and they lost it. They lost whatever made them wolves to where they are now. But then he believed that Danica would have been the one to bring them back to what they had been 15,000 years ago. Because his daughter he told and she didn't care. But Danica, he's like, I think it could have been Danica. It could have been her. And so then Bryce knows she's got about 30 seconds left before she's got to leave, before she gets caught being there talking to the Prime. So she's like, hey, by the way, you should talk to Sabine about Ethan. And he's like, what about Ethan? And she's like, oh, well, Sabine kicked him out and almost killed him, and he's now living with my brother. And so the Prime is like, don't love that. And then she leaves. And then when they get back to her apartment, her and I think Deck, whoever was with her, Declan or something, they find Cormac. And Cormac is like beaten up and bloody and everything. They're like, dude, what happened to you? And he's like, almost got caught by the Dreadwolves at a drop-off for like the rebel stuff. But it's okay, I was downwind, so they didn't send me. And then also, this is not my blood, this is theirs. The few that would have seen me. So we got it handled. But found some more intel. Turns out that hit on the spine, so that info we got from Agent Daybright, all of that went well. Now that mech suit and a whole bunch of ammo is now being sent to the Cornwall Islands, which is about 2 hours from Crescent City, specifically to a base on an island called Idra. And he's like, they're gonna send this to like Pippa Spestos, who's here. So like obviously we need to go make sure and convince Command not to give the entire rebel Velbar front to Pippa, because she's just a crazy person, but they like her because she gets results, except for also at the expense of literally like everybody, so like not great. Anyway, he's like, we're gonna go convince them not to give her command. But anyway, we're also gonna go look at this mech suit prototype. He's like, but to do this, we're gonna need Hunt Athalar's expertise. So then Bryce is like, okay. She rehearses a plan in her head of how she's gonna convince Celestina to let him go like a week earlier, a couple days early, however long it's been. Right before her meeting with Celestina, which she also got this meeting by calling in as Princess Bryce Danon. Whatever, she used her Fae princess status to get this meeting with Celestina, because an archangel can't ignore a meeting with a princess. And then right before this meeting, like as she's literally walking down the hall to her door, Juniper calls her and she's like, hey, what's up, are you okay? And then Juniper immediately starts laying into Bryce. She's like, you are the worst, I can't believe you did this, I hate you, all this horrible stuff. Apparently Bryce also, when she found out that Juniper had been passed up for principal and given the status, whatever, was given to a lesser dancer, basically, all because these rich snobs were upset at Juniper because in the spring she had been like advocating for them to keep the doors open and help and let humans in and whatnot, and then they like didn't like that and being told that they were stupid and whatnot, so they've been punishing Juniper by not promoting her to principal. So Bryce thought it was ridiculous that they hadn't been promoting her, so she also used her princess status for that, to get them to listen and promote her. So Juniper got promoted to principal, and Bryce is like, that's great. And she's like, no, because now everyone thinks I'm like, I didn't earn it because my friend, you had to use our princess status to get it to me, and you ruined literally everything I've ever done, all my hard work, like gone out the window. This is the worst. I'm not even talking to you forever now. So anyway, Bryce really hurt about that, and then has to go talk to Celestina, so she pretends everything's fine. And she goes and talks to her. She's like, hey, can I have Hunt back just for like 24-hour period? We're gonna go to Nidaros. I'm gonna take him home, talk with my mom, all this stuff, blah blah blah. Celestina's like, that sounds really nice. You know what? Take him, and like you can have him back forever. He doesn't need to come back. After that, she's like, really? She's like, yeah, he's been moping around here. Go, you got it, it's fine. Then we jump over to Ethan. Ethan gets a call from the Prime, and he's like, holy crap, like all the wolves have the Prime's number, but you never call that number and it never calls you. And so then he's like, oh my gosh, the Prime? So he answers, he's like, hello sir? And the Prime is basically like, Ethan, what are you doing? Tell me exactly what happened. He's like, you could just ask your daughter. He's like, no, I want to hear it from you. And he's like, hey, well, she kicked me out because of what I did, disobeying her to save the humans and help Bryce, and then also that I defended Bryce in an article about everything that happened in the spring. And so then the Prime's like, you know what? you have alpha energy. You've always kind of like held yourself back and let others be the alpha, but you definitely, I've sensed it in you for a while. You've got that alpha energy. I would be happy to name you alpha of your own pack if you want. And Ethan's like, oh, holy crap, that's crazy. That's like a really good opportunity. But also he's like, who would I have in my pack? I pushed away everybody, and or everyone else hates me, or they're dead. So he's like, this is like a great honor. Like, I'll definitely think about it. Give me some time. And Alpha's like, that's fine. Take your time. You just let me know. And he's like, cool. And then he hangs up the phone, and this man goes back to the astronomer's place because he's stupid. Anyway, he goes in, knocks, no one answers. He just walks in, and then he sees that the girl, that mystic that he had ripped out of the tank, she's still out of the tank, sitting on the floor, and she's just like staring at him, and she's like, he's not here. I had to go get a part that he didn't have to fix my machine, whatever. And so Ethan's like trying to talk with her or whatever, and the girl's like, I just want to go back into there and not this life because I like it. And then she like moves a little bit, and he senses that she's a wolf, and then he's immediately like even more upset. He's like, oh my gosh, you're a wolf, you can't be here, this is a cage, wolves can't be in cages. And then she's like, dude, I'm fine, I want to be here. If I left, my family would not be fed. Like, I'm here because it feeds my family. So, like, do not take me from here. I don't want to leave. This is fine. I come from a family with 12 children. We didn't have a pack, a den, whatever. We were just my family, and we just roamed around. And then when I was 3, I exhibited whatever gift that happens when you become a mystic, and then they sold me. They gave her over to the astronomer. Essentially, they sold her, whatever. And she, being there, earns them money or whatever it does, and so it puts food on the table for them. So she's like, I'm fine. And he's like, we'll see about that. I don't love that. And then as they're talking, she's getting all feisty, whatever, and he's like, not only is she a wolf, this is alpha energy. She got strong alpha energy. He's like, oh my gosh, this is so not right. So he's very upset about this, and she's like, don't even touch me. He'll know, and he will send me into the deepest pits of hell with a really stupid question as punishment. And he could tell that he's done that because that was really specific. And so she's like, yeah, don't even, if he knows someone else has been here, it won't be good. So then he's like, fine, but he sees that on like a little, in the little chest or like on a counter or something, is those rings he'd been wearing, because apparently they're valuable enough that he doesn't leave there without them, or doesn't leave there with them. So he's like, I'm taking these, and he swipes them and he leaves. So he's got all 4 of the rings in this box now. Then we get some more conversations between Rune and Agent Daybright, and he's starting to like her, and he's opening up to her a little bit. She's like kind of opening up to him a teensy bit. So those are just like sporadic throughout the chapters, and then we get to some crazy stuff. Cormac teleports the group to Idra. Okay, so they get there, he goes talks to command. Pippa's got her fingers on command though, so they're like, yes Pippa, you can have the entire Valbar in front. And he's like, we're screwed guys, she's a crazy psychopath, she's gonna kill a lot of innocents because she does not care, and this is not looking good for us. And so then she comes out and she sucks, and they bring out the mech suit prototype, and they're like, all right, Umbra Mortis, do your thing. And so he uses his lightning powers because he can kind of sense how machines work with doing them. So he like sends his little lightning powers, blah blah blah, and is like, holy crap guys, this machine is no joke. It's not good. It can fit 1 veneer in there, and the reason it's way smaller than you human ones is because it needs no battery, nothing. It was pretty much invincible power-wise because it just pulls first light from the ground it walks on, and then it just is constantly being recharged that way. And then also it's using the first light there and making its own brimstone missiles, so it will literally never run out of ammo or power, ever. So this is bad news. You should not, nobody should be using this. 0 people. And Pippa's like, this is amazing. And so then she leaves to go talk to command about how awesome this is, and their group is like, guys, this is a terrible idea. And then Bryce is like, you know what, light it up, huh? And he's like, say less. Uses his lightning, blows up the whole ship. Cormac's like, no, we can't just be doing this. This is not good, because he's still rebel, you know, he's still for the cause. He's just anti-Pippa. And then they start shooting at them, and then of course Cormac gets hit with a Gorgon bullet, so he can't teleport them out. And so then they run into a boat, and then Therian is like helping them propel this boat, and they're driving away. And then they see a hellhound on the coast, and he starts barking at him and basically like signaling like, look that way. And then Hunt is like, holy F, the hind is here. This is even worse. They're like, we can't be spotted. They can't see us. So then the hind shows up in a boat or something with her dread wolves. Guess what? She sees them. She pulls up, but she just pulls up by herself. So like, possibility the wolves haven't seen them. She shows up to them and she's like, well, 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 I found a bunch of rats. My favorite part of the job. And then she takes a little glowing stone and drops it. She's like, I showed Sophie Renast this trick. Let's see how far down is it to the bottom where you'll sink. And then she's like, basically you got two choices. One, you come back with me. Two, you die right here, right now. And then they're like, obviously none of these are great. And so Cormac, obviously he's not teleporting anywhere. Rune's shadow's not gonna work because the sun is too bright. Because I think it was sunrise when they got there. Doesn't matter. Either way, shadows, no bueno. Not working. The water moves too much anyway. Hunt has his lightning, and he's definitely building up his power, and he's got this, like, death look in his eyeballs, and the lightning is, like, crackling at the tops of his wings, but also, if he isn't careful, will just fry them all, because they're all in the water. We'll zap them all. And then Bryce is, like, trying to use her starlight. She's like, maybe if I blind them, I'll just blind them, so I'll blind the hind. So like her star is like starting to glow a little bit. All this jazz is happening. And then just before Bryce is about to just go like whoocha, supernova, blinding, metal hits her feet and boop, the ship pops out of nowhere, this giant submarine type thing, and then they're like, hurry, get in. And so then they run into the hatch and the hind speeds off to her main boat, whatever, and they leave and they're like, well, we're screwed. The hind saw us. We're so screwed, but it's fine. They have bigger problems to worry about because now they got to figure out who the heck is this boat that we're on. And then also a bunch of Omega boats are chasing them. So they're like a life or death situation. Hunt full on ballistic, like Thor mode where his eyes are full lightning and he's got lightning crackling everywhere. And he is just not hearing anything. You can tell he has descended into a full-on killing rage, like ready to use his power at any moment to save Bryce. And Rune tells Bryce in her mind as they're walking down the ship following this lady who's introduced herself as Captain Sendes, who's also a Mer. He's like, just letting you know that Hunt here, if you don't calm him down, first off, we're gonna fry. Second off, this is like a mate thing. Like, you guys are like mates, because he's like going ballistic in the primal way a mate does when their mate is like in danger. And Bryce is like, okay, well, that's lovely. And he's like, figure it out. So they're walking, whatever. Sendes is like introducing him to the ship. She's like, oh, this is our giant, awesome ship of the Ocean Queen. And this is like a whole park that we have inside of our ship because why not? Some nature, you know? And then she's like, blah, 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 showing all this stuff. And then Bryce is like, you know what? Do you mind if me and my friend here, who's all crackling and lightning-y because everyone keeps looking at him like, a little scared here. She's like, do you mind if we just go, like, walk around that giant park nature thing? And she's like, yeah, go ahead. So they start walking back and she gets on her little radio and she's like, hey, clear that park and then also lock the doors. And then Rune's like, what? And she's like, they look like they need some privacy. They do, in fact, need privacy. Anyway, she continues on the tour. She's like, hey, let you guys rest here. We got some barracks you can stay in, and then we'll deliver you wherever you want to go, basically. She answers Therion's questions and is like, we got 6 of these bad boys, the Ocean Queen does, and the Asteri doesn't know about it, so, like, you say nothing, we say nothing about how we found you with these Ophion rebels, you know? A tit for tat sort of situation. And then also Rune's like, what about these Omega boats that are literally chasing us? She's like, nah, it's fine, we're totally camouflaged. And she's like, look, out these giant windows. And then they watch as this U-boat comes like right out of them, passes them, doesn't even see them. Like, they don't show up on the radar, nothing. They use like some camouflage whatever that like ocean creatures use or something, whatever it is. So they're totally fine, totally safe, they don't show up on radar. It's fantastic. And they pass by some like ruins that are underwater that have like some weird strange symbols on them, and Rune's like, dang, this is pretty cool. And Therion's like, dang, this is awesome, I didn't know this existed. And they're like, hey, you're welcome to come back anytime that you want. And he's like, really? Like, I don't know if I ever could. And they're like, hey man, you totally could. And then like Captain Sendes and him have a moment where they are talking somewhere where everybody else is resting, and she's like, I'm really sorry that the River Queen like has led you to believe that like all like have such a strong distrust of all people, because like the Ocean Queen, she doesn't want power at all. She like would literally be happy without the Asteri and just going back to the way things were before the Asteri got here, which does not involve her taking their place. Therion's like, I can't believe that you would believe her. And she's like, I can't believe that the River Queen would like hurt you so badly. that you wouldn't just believe her. Like, I totally believe the Ocean Queen. And clearly the River Queen is a power-hungry, crazy person, so sorry about that. Like, letting you know if you ever want, there's a place for you here. And he's like, man, I would love this life, but I cannot. I must go back. Anyway, cut over to Bryce and Hunt. They go into this park place thing. I don't know. It's like a giant nature thing inside of the ship, and Bryce knows that she's got to get Hunt to calm down, and so her best way of doing that is getting him to burn some steam, if you know what I mean. So they officially consummate their relationship all the way, and then this does in fact get Hunt to release his crazy built-up lightning energy powers. However, during said activities in said forest, his power is going into Bryce. Bryce's power is like making her glow all like, I don't know, like a glow stick, I imagine. And then by association, Hunt's also now glowing like a glow stick. They're both glowing. They're like, dang, that's crazy. And then as they're wrapping up their fun here, all of a sudden they look up and they are no longer in the park. They're now in the airlock. And they were like, what the frick? How did we end up here? Wild. Turns out they teleported Hunt's magic into Bryce. Her body absorbed it and then teleported finally. So then she's all excited and she runs to the group. She's like, guys, we just totally teleported during sex. And everyone was like, that was way too much information, but okay. And she's like, I don't know how it happened. And then Cormac is like, he's all good and better. They healed him, got that bullet out of him. He's recovering fine. He kind of explains, he's like, oh, it must be like, you're like, kind of like a battery and he like charged you up or something. I don't know. They explain whatever it is that they want to explain, and then the people come back in. They're like, hey, we heard during surgery when you were like all loopy, you kept saying the name Sophie Renast. We got some news for you, pal. Turns out, actually, like a few weeks ago, we had been called to like save an agent up in the North Sea, but unfortunately when we arrived, she had already drowned. And so then they take the group to the morgue, and there's Sophie's body. She has been dead this whole time. She literally has been dead since the prologue. She died. So Cormac mourns, has his moment of mourning, and they're all feel bad. They're like, dang, Cormac, this is really unfortunate. But then they're like, hey, by the way, do you know what any of this means? And like in her arm, she like had carved a bunch of series of like numbers and stuff in her arm, and no one knows what it means. So they're like, weird, I don't know. So they let Cormac mourn and all that stuff. Meanwhile, while they're all going through this crazy stuff happening, Ethan arrives home and he's like, so guys, I might have done something. Shows Declan, Flynn, and Declan's boyfriend Mark the rings that he stole. And Mark's like, he's a lawyer, so he's like, you don't really have strong legal precedence here. Sorry to break it to you, bud. But then the rings start like vibrating, like they heard them, and they're like, maybe we have to return them, like I don't know. And Ethan's like, we can't return them. And then they like vibrate, like shake the box, and they're like, oh yeah, they really didn't like that. So then Flynn's like, you know what, we're opening them, we're gonna free them. And then they're like, well, there's no going back if we do this. So he takes a hammer, pops open these rings, and the first three he pops open, these three little sprites come out. And then right as he's about to open the fourth one, the three sprites are like, don't, and then too late, cracks it. And then this one looked different. Like the ring itself just glowed really brightly. You couldn't tell it wasn't like the same kind of light as the fire sprites, for good reason, because now all of a sudden on their table is this like naked woman just laying there, and they're like, what the? And then as she moves, like underneath her skin, you can see it looks like scales, and they're like, oh, it's a dragon. And then we get introduced to them eventually. The three sprites are triplets, and their names are Reethi, Sasa, and Milana. And then the dragon eventually gives her name, and her name is Ariadne. However you want to say that, I don't know. So they're like, cool, we got new roommates. They're like, feel free to take Rune's room. Mind you, Rune's been gone for literally less than 24 hours. So they're like, yeah, take his room. So they're like trying to figure out how they're gonna figure this out legally and not return them to the astronomer, because they definitely don't want to go back. And they also are all marked with the slave SPQM, so like this is definitely not good. They're definitely slaves, and stolen slaves is not a good legal case. So this is what they've been dealing with while the rest of the group is almost died by the hind. So okay, we get another moment between Rune and Ancient Daybright. Also, don't remember if I said this in my last video recap. On that mental bridge that he like meets her in, there's like two couches. So they meet on these couches now when they meet. Anyway, he basically opens up to her about what the Oracle told him about being last in his bloodline, so he can't have kids, so which means he's either gonna die before he has kids or he's shooting blanks. Either one. So that's something he's never actually said out loud or to another person, so just another example of them just, you know, getting to know each other more. And then somehow, I forget how it happens, but somehow it ends up where she offers to tell him a story, and he's like, yeah, and then calls her bluff, and then she's like, okay, and she starts telling him a story, and then he falls asleep, and then he wakes up, and she's asleep on her couch, and he goes over, and then he catches a glimpse of just like really long hair draped over a couch, and then she goes back in flames, and then she like jumps up and is like, oh, what are you doing? And he's like, I just wanted to know the end of the story because I fell asleep, and then she just like says an ending that I forget whatever the story was, and then she just leaves, and he's like, okay, sorry, my bad. Then the group finally gets dropped off. Therian made a call to his peeps at the Blue Court. They get dropped off back near Crescent City, so they go right to Bryce's apartment. Baxian shows up, and he's like, I want in. And they're like, into what? And they try playing dumb, and he's like, just let me in. I'm a rebel sympathizer. Let me in. I want to be part of it. And they're like, sir, we don't know what you're talking about. Don't know what you saw. And he's like, dude, I just saved your life. I've literally given you no other reasons to why you shouldn't like let me in and trust me. And then he's like, you guys are a bunch of stupid idiots. Whenever you're ready, I'm waiting for you. And then he leaves. And then everybody finally leaves Bryce's apartment, and then Hunt asks her, he's like, hey, how do you know about Emil and that he's with the Viper Queen? She tries to play dumb, because turns out Pippa had been bragging about how they weren't going about Emil anymore, and like nobody should, because like good luck trying to get him from wherever he was. And Hunt saw Bryce's face, and her face was like she knew something, and he was about to call her out on it, and she gave him this look like don't say anything, so he doesn't say anything then in front of everybody, but now they're alone. He's like, I know that you know about Emil. How do you know where he is? And how do you know that it's with the Viper Queen? And so then she has to admit, she's like, alright, you got me, bud. How'd you know that it's a Viper Queen? He's like, come on. Pippa was dropping snake hints everywhere. It was really easy and obvious. And she's like, okay, well, here's what happened. I went to the Viper Queen and had her go hunting for Emil, because who better equipped than somebody who probably most definitely has like mercenaries and stuff in her employ and to go hunt for him. So that's what I had her do, because the traces of Emil were found in the marshes, and she's the Viper Queen. She literally has got like snake in the name. Like I know she's got some kind of connection with snakes and reptiles, and so like there's literally Sobex, which is some kind of reptile in the marshes, so I figured she'd find him sooner or later. So it turns out all that human female scent that they had been finding around those dead bodies was actually this mercenary, and turns out it was this mercenary killing all these rebels and stuff, trying to find Emil, and not anybody else. To which Bryce was like, actually I didn't approve of that, by the way. When we went to go look in the meat market with Juniper and Fury, I told the Viper Queen that I did not appreciate all these bodies she left in her wake. It's not what I wanted. I didn't want all these people dying, but she obviously didn't listen because she left a few more bodies, but they did end up catching him. But at that point, they hadn't caught him yet, and so I went there to check and drop some hints about that, and then her people told me that they hadn't found him yet, and so that's what was happening there. So Hunt, not very happy at having been left out of these plans this whole time, they go to the Viper Queen, and then they meet Emil, and the Viper Queen, you know, gives them some room to talk with the kid, and they introduce themselves, and he really is just a scared little kid. And then Hunt is like showing off his lightning powers a little bit, and he's like, hey man, it's okay, blah blah blah, this stuff. And then he's like, what are you talking about? And then Bryce is like, Hunt, he doesn't have powers. And then Hunt is like, what do you mean? Also, how do you know that? You just met this kid right now. And she's like, well, I just, you know, took this logical guess that obviously Emil is really important, but he's important to his family, to Sophie, to people who care about him, and to Vanir, who only care about power. Looking at Hunt, she was like, I knew that Sophie probably just lied about him having powers so that they would rescue him and save him, even though he doesn't actually have any powers or anything. And so then Emil's like, yeah, no, I got nothing. It was all Sophie. And those U-boats going down when that whole rescue mission, that was all Sophie as well. Like, not me whatsoever. And they were like, dang. Well, Hunt's like, it's fine, I'm not mad about you not having power. I'm more mad that, like, Bryce took this giant risk. He's like, the Viper Queen is expecting him to have powers, and you're just saying, inside of her building, he has no powers. Like, you're setting yourself up to die. This was a crazy, insane risk that you took, and you didn't even include me in this risk. And so this is why he's really pissed and really upset about this. And then Bryce is just like, oh, you're a really annoying alpha hole. You just only care about power. I don't know. Whatever it is, she's getting upset, okay? And she's like, it's alright, Emil. We got a new family for you. We got you. You'll be safe. And Hunt is just kind of going along with it, being like, what is happening? What do you mean you found somewhere safe for him? You better not be coming to our apartment, because that's not safe. And then she calls Fury, and she's like, hey, pull up. And Fury's like, I got you. She pulls up in her car, and then he doesn't have any belongings, so, they just load him in the car. And then she's like, it's an 8-hour drive, or 9 hours or something, to Nidaros. And then Bryce is like, hey, make sure you stop and you get snacks. And Fury's like, what do you mean? She's like, all the food that provides no nutrition to your body but all the nutrition to your soul, stop and get this kid snacks, because he's like skinny and gangly and he deserves some snacks. And Hunt's like, yes, get him snacks. And Fury's like, whatever, if we don't stop, we'll get there in 9 hours. If we don't stop for snacks, we'll get there in 9 hours, but if we stop for snacks, it'll probably take 10 hours. And she's like, it's fine. And then she's like, all right, Amelia, you're no longer gonna be named Emile anymore, but your new adopted family is going to be great. And then Hunt's like, holy crap, her parents are adopting Emile. So then she's still all upset at Hunt, and he's all upset at her for like not including him, because he thought they were a team, but this was not a team effort. This was very much a one-sided thing. So she storms off to work, and he storms off to work. Well, he flies above and obviously makes sure she gets to work fine before he flies back to work. But anyway, they're having a little bit of a tiff here. Later on, she explains, though, that the way that she communicated all of this with her parents without being caught or without Hunt noticing is anytime her mom and her fight, her mom's way of apologizing would be sending a postcard, which included when they lived in the same house, she'd slide a postcard into the door, and this is like how they'd make up. And so after they had fought before, at the beginning of the book, her mom had sent Bryce a postcard as a peace offering. And so it started out as that, but then she used a code, because obviously her father's Randall. He taught her some codes for emergencies, so then they were using a code in their postcards so that no one would know what they were talking about if they had been, intercepting said postcards. And basically she was like, I got a kid for you, adopt, blah, 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 because her parents, Randall and Ember, could not have children of their own outside of Bryce herself. So she's like, 2 birds with 1 stone, giving them a 13-year-old son. So she sent Emile off literally to her parents to go get adopted by them. And his name's now Cooper Zalago. Anyway, also the Viper told Bryce that she now owes her a favor, so that's lovely. Next, Hunt goes and he reports to Celestina, and he does feel bad because he obviously has to lie to her, and he feels bad lying to her because she's like so nice and believing and everything. But he tells her that her little trip to Nidaros was great, and then he just uses things that he already knows about Ember from like when he first met her months ago to like make it sound more credible about how he thought that she wasn't gonna like him and blah blah blah, all this stuff. And then he does explain, just to again cover his bases a little bit, he's like, yeah, it was a little awkward because like Crown Prince Rune and Cormac were also there, so made it a little awkward in the house. Because obviously Celestina, the first thing she says to him, Hunt, when he walks in is like, congrats. And he's like, what do you mean? She's like, well, your scent has changed. You smell like a mated man. So congrats for you and Bryce. And he's like, thank you. Didn't realize it went to such a biological level already that we were mates, but yes. So then, he's like, yeah, it was a little awkward. And she's like, yeah, because Cormac's supposed to be her fiance. And he's like, yeah, that whole BS thing, but it's fine anyway. It was a good trip, good time. How are things here? She's like, just doing party decorations and stuff for her own official mating ceremony thing, or whatever. I don't know, whatever thing is happening for her and Ephraim. And then he asks what he can do to help, and she's like, hey, I got some demon reports I want you to like look through and give me your expertise on. He's like, I got you. So then he's looking at these reports, and turns out there were reports up in Nina, so her old territory, which is up really near Pangera or the Eternal City or wherever like this area are. It's like really close to there, and so it's close to the Northern Rift. Turns out there's a lot of spawnings of different demons, but specifically some called Deathstalkers. Deathstalkers are like assassins of the Prince of the Pit. They are nasty. Once they're told who to go after, they don't go after it until they're dead or the person's dead. That's how they work. So he's like, these are nasty business. He's got a nasty scar on his back from one, so he's like, this is not good. But they were spotted in Nina, and then they disappeared. So he goes and he warns Therian. He's like, hey, I got some news for you. Shows him some pictures of these Deathstalkers that were spotted, and he's like, hey, warning everybody, demons on the loose. Warn your people that you need to. And Therian's like, dude, thanks, this is crazy. I'll warn who I need to. And he's like, also, now that we're here, they're in like some place with less cameras, like a nice garden with water fountains features and stuff, so they can't be overheard. He's like, now that we're here, also need to tell you that you should stop looking for a meal. Like, stop it. Just cold cut, nothing. Make up some BS for your queen, but you're stopping. You're ending it. I'm telling you now, you're stopping it. Therion's like, bro, why would I do that? And Hunt's like, I know where he is, and I'm telling you that you're done. And so then Therion's like, well, is it even wise for you to tell me? And he's like, are you gonna torture me, bud? And Therion's like, I mean, I was considering it. And then Hunt does a little lightning thing, and he's like, sure, bud, try. And then Therion's like, hey, man, if you're this serious about it, that odds are that Legs is involved, Bryce. So he's like, I could just go and ask her. What's stopping me from asking her where this kid is? And then Hunt's like, well, hard to ask questions if you don't have a head attached to your body. And Therion's like, all right, threat taken. I'll come up with something. It's gonna have to be really, really good, spun up really well for the queen. Then he's looking at how perfect a day it is, and he's like, you know what? There's nothing saying that the queen needs to know now. River Queen doesn't need to know today. And Hunt picks up on it. He's like, she doesn't need to know for a few days, maybe even weeks. And Therion's like, maybe even months if it's spun correctly. And he was like, you know, that sounds like a good idea. So now Therion's like, oh my gosh, freedom. I can live above with this excuse of looking for a meal and then just go down the beneath whenever I need to just keep up appearances. And outside of that, little bits of freedom living above. So he's like, this is a great idea for however long it lasts. So that's his plan. Anyway, then we cut to Rune. He goes home. And what does he find but 4 new roommates? And he's like, guys, I literally was gone for 24 hours, sunrise to sunrise. How do we have 4 new roommates that are not here legally? And they're like, well, we're working on it. And turns out our best bet is you using your royal status as a prince, and maybe even Bryce also, you know, and if you use your royal status, you can commandeer slaves and like for your own purposes. So like that could be a thing. Rune's like, this is a nightmare. Okay, I guess we'll work on it. We'll figure it out, right? So he calls Bryce and he's like, Bryce, I need you to get over here ASAP. So right before she even gets to work, she's like, fine. Heads over to Rune's place, and now she knows about these fire sprites. And then she also is a little sad because she also remembers Lahaba. She tells him, she's like, I had a friend once, Lahaba, do you know her? And they're all like, no, but we've been in these rings for a minute, so like, you know, interesting that you're friends with a fire sprite. Not very many people are friends with fire sprites. And she's like, yeah, I bought her freedom, and her first and last act of freedom was saving my life. And they're like, dang, you should tell that story to this like sprite queen something. And then Bryce is like, sure, I guess, add it to my tab. I don't know what you're talking about or why I would need to do that. And then the sprites are like, well, first you'd have to find her, and we don't know where she is either, but like, if you ever find her, you should tell her the story about Lahaba and her great braveness and all this stuff. And she's like, okay, cool. So then they come up with their plan, whatever, to try to use their standing as Fae to, not as Fae, but as like Fae royalty to, you know, commandeer these slaves, whatever, so that they can have some legal case about stealing them from the astronomer. Even though it wasn't right that he had them, he did have all the legal precedent for it, so like, it's not looking great for them, and specifically for Ethan. Okay, then she goes back to work. Hunt shows up afterwards. She hides out in there until the building is literally closing, and so then she leaves, and the Hunt's waiting for her because they haven't fought like this before, and so she's unsure how it's gonna go down. And he's like, I didn't realize you were gonna hide in the building all day until it closed. And she was like, well, sorry, we can't go back in there. You guess you'll have to wait till tomorrow to look for whatever your question was. And he's like, no, you're really good at talking your way into or out of things, so you're just gonna walk right back in. But turns out, perks of her job, she actually can be there after hours when the building is closed to the public, so they just walk right in. And then they go to whatever little desk, and he looks at whatever thing he's looking at, and then they kind of make up, and she explains the whole postcard thing and blah blah blah. And so then he explains that he just was like, I thought we were a team, that's why I was upset. You know, not that like he had no powers, it's just I'm upset about you putting yourself in this danger and then not also letting me know, and etc., all this other stuff. So then they make up that way. And then Bryce is like, hey, I know a book that might be useful for you over in those shelves that are really dark over there and out of camera sight. And he's like, you know what, yeah, let's go find this book. Hint, there's no book. Anyway, they continue to make up over there in the dark. And then the next day, they're at work. Well, Bryce is at work, and then who should show up but her lovely father, the Autumn King. He shows up, and of course he's got nothing good to say. First off, he rips into her a little bit for being mated, because obviously her scent has changed as well. So he's like, dude, you're stupid. Also, you're still engaged to Cormac until I say so. So that's still happening. Second, also, I heard that you have been throwing around my name, Danon. You have been using it as Princess Bryce Danon for a couple of favors, whatever, and so because you've now accepted this, you have now accepted officially being a Fae Princess, so it's all legally changed, so your name is legally now Bryce Adelaide Danon, not Bryce Adelaide Quinlan, to which Bryce is like, if you literally change my name, I will kill you, and he's like, too late, it's already done, paperwork's already drafted, have fun with that, to which she's royally pissed and knows that her mother will also be royally pissed, and she's immediately trying to think of all the ways to get out of it. She's like, oh, this is the worst, and he's like, well, you shouldn't have been using it. You using it accepted you being a princess, so this is all on you. And then he also is like, by the way, the reason I'm still keeping this engagement a thing, even though you freaking are mated to Athalar now, is because I was doing it for you, for your safety, because first off, Cormac is like really powerful and everything, so that's just like great from that standpoint. But second off, you being in Avalon would have been safe for you. And she's like, you've literally never cared about my safety ever. And he's like, trust me, watching Micah chuck you around in that gallery, it was unsavory. She's like, wow, thanks for caring about me, father. Gross. You don't care about me. And he's like, girl, you killed an archangel. The Asteri are literally watching you like hawks. It would have been safer if you were to go to Avalon, because there are mists around their island. Even the Asteri can't pierce them. So then Bryce is thinking, she's like, I mean, that makes sense, but this obviously can't be true. And then he ends up leaving, and she's still pissed about the name change, okay? Meanwhile, over at Rune's place, they have another unexpected visitor, Hypaxia. Haven't seen her in a hot minute. She shows up. She's like, what's up? I have a favor to ask of you, Rune. May I talk to you in private? Everybody else goes upstairs. Hypaxia sees that dragon and is just kind of like, that's crazy. Dragons are pretty rare. So wild. She ends up talking with Rune, sort of privately. Ethan and whoever else has good hearing upstairs, they can totally hear, but it's fine. Anyway, Hypaxia basically is like, hey, I'm here for like whatever big celebration thing's happening, and I was wondering if you could like spare me some protection. Basically, send somebody, I don't know, do something, protect me. And he's like, I'm confused. Isn't this what like a witch's coven's for and everything, all this stuff? She's like, yeah, let me explain here what's been going on. I am half necromancer. My coven doesn't like that. Also, my coven is my mother's coven, and her last wish was that I inherit hers. However, they are loyal to her and not me. And my entire life, I've been like isolated from them. They don't like me very much. A lot of them were often talking about how they wish that Lydia wasn't given away and she stayed, because they would rather have a half shifter than a half necromancer. So also, I didn't really have any friends or anything growing up. I had 3 tutors. They also didn't like that though, because it was really unorthodox, because my 3 tutors were in fact dead. They literally were not alive. And they taught me all the things that I knew. So I was very isolated, didn't have any friends, just my mother, and then she died and left me with her coven, who, they don't like me, they don't trust me, I don't trust them. So here I am asking you, my betrothed, for protection. And he's like, I got it, I see. And it would be less suspicious because we are betrothed. And she's like, yes, you're catching on. And he's like, okay, cool. That works for me. I'll do that. And then he's like, how do you feel about a wolf protector? And so then they ask Ethan, and Ethan's like, sure. Also couldn't help but hearing you're a necromancer or whatever. Like, would you possibly be able to help me in talking to my brother Connor? And just finding out, she's like, oh, I see that you've learned about Second Lie. And they're like, you know about this? And she's like, well, yeah, the dead talk. It's hard to not know about it, and it is a bit unsavory, and I did do some things that crossed a lot of lines to make sure my mother wasn't in one of those resting places, and that she just skipped to wherever souls go after that. But yeah, I'll help you. We'll have to do it on the autumnal equinox, which is when the area like the worlds between the spiritual dead and normal world, whatever, is the thinnest during that autumnal equinox, so I'll help you then. So Ethan's like, perfect, I'll be a guard. And then Rin's like, you know, Mile, we're talking about unorthodox ways here. How do you also feel about a dragon? Because I need some fancy reason to, you know, have her. So could she guard you? And Hypaxia's like, you know, sure, why not? That works. Then Bryce having a mental breakdown, being overwhelmed about trying to figure out how to get out of this whole being a princess thing and not being Quinlan, because she's like, I am a Quinlan, not a Danon, screw that. And when she got home, she also had like paperwork already mailed to her about like all of her name change, like her motorcycle, not a motorcycle, her scooter registration, and like a new credit card that's like straight to her daddy's bank account with Bryce Danon on it. And so she is literally hating life. So she's like, you know what, who might understand? Hypaxia. Gives the girl a call. They go and meet up at a pizza joint, grab some food. Ethan's there guarding. She doesn't see the dragon, but she's like, she must be watching outside or something. So anyway, they start talking, and then Hypaxia's like, yeah, this is the first girl talk I've ever had. And Bryce is like, I mean, Rune filled me in. I do know everything that you told him. And so Hypaxia's like, yeah, such is life, you know. It do be difficult. And she kind of tries to offer some comforting words about the whole princess thing, and she's like, even if you can't change it, maybe you can manage it, you know, a certain way and try to make it work for you, because that does kind of suck that this all happened and you didn't want it to happen. But if you can't change it, then, you know, try to make it work for you. And Bryce is like, okay, good idea. So then they go, she's like, hey, when they're done eating, let's go on a walk. And Hypaxia's like, I would love that. So then they're going and they're walking and they're having a grand old time. And then that's when Bryce is attempting to talk up Rune. She's like, hey, I don't know how do you feel or anything, but like, he is a good guy. You could do a lot worse than him. And Hypaxia admits that she did have somebody, but then circumstances changed, and then they didn't want to try to continue because it was difficult, and so then she doesn't really have anybody. But Bryce is like, that does suck. Just saying that if you have to go through with it though, Rune, he's not bad. And Hypaxia's like, thanks, but we'll see. And then as they're walking, Ethan behind them, all of a sudden, crazy demon thing pops out of nowhere, like super speedy fast, and just rips Ethan's throat out, and he just falls to the ground dying. And then Hypaxia and Bryce barely have a second to like figure out what's happening when a second one pops up. And then Bryce is like going into shock, and Hypaxia's like, get up, we have to go. And she pulls out a knife from who knows where. And so then they're trying to figure out what to do, and then they're being circled by these things, and Ethan's just dying there, and he has a gun, but he didn't even get a second to like take out the gun because it just like attacked super quick. So Bryce is like, okay, I need to figure out how to get over there with the gun and you know, figure out what the heck to do. So she's like, Hypaxia, what's your magic? And she's like, does this matter? And she's like, well, it does. If it's some kind of energy or something like lightning, you can blast at me, charge me up like a battery, and that might work. And Hypaxia's like, you want to try this now? And she's like, well, we don't have many options. So Hypaxia's like, all right, fine. Blast some of her whatever magic she's got into Bryce. She lights up and then bloop, teleports to the other side, grabs Ethan's gun, and then she shoots one demon down. But the second one dodges, like it can sense where the bullet literally is. It just like dodges, and so then Hypaxia manages to get on her broom and then is like flying above it, and then Bryce distracts and then uses the last couple bits of magic she just still has left from Hypaxia's little charge to teleport around, and that's the only way she's being able to stay ahead of this thing. And then Hypaxia comes down from the sky and whatcha, kills it. And then just as they're like, holy crap, we're good, runs over to Ethan. She's like, you need some med witch. And Hypaxia's like, I am a med witch. She's like, that's right, sorry. And then Hypaxia's working on him and trying to fix up his missing body parts here. And then Isaiah lands and he's like, oh my gosh, are you alright? What happened? Where's Hunt? And then Hunt lands and he's like, I'm right here. And then he sees what happens. He's like, not the Death Stalkers. I've been trying to warn people about these suckers, and now they're here. And so he's like mortified. He's like, guys, how do you have literally not a scratch on you, Bryce? And then she's like, so it turns out I teleported. I'm learning. And he's like stressed, but also glad that she's okay. And then they end up taking Ethan to the embassy for the witches, where Hypaxia can like continue healing him and watching over him. Then he wakes up, and then Declan and Flynn are there, and they're like waiting to check in on him, and Rune, and they're like, hey, well, glad to see that you're okay. And he's like waiting for them to like rip into him for being a failure at guarding, and they don't, because it's not his fault that he was attacked by literal assassins from the pit. But, you know, in his mind and his experience, this is what people are gonna do. They do not. And then he's like, oh my gosh, it's nice to have actual friends. So he hasn't had friends since Sunball and like the Pack of Devils. And so it's been a minute. Because even Amelie's like group, they were just very serious, humorless, nothing. And then they're like, hey, Hypaxia, when can you come home? And then Ethan is like, home? I've only lived there for like a week and a half, and like I haven't had a home in forever, in a really long time. So like this feels nice. And he's like, I'm loving this, you know, this is feeling good. She says he can stay overnight, and then she'll check on him in the morning and, you know, evaluate there, and then he can go home. Meanwhile, Hunt is trying to figure out, okay, why did these things attack you, Bryce? And she's like, well, if we believe Apollyon, maybe this was like a test to see if I'm like a worthy opponent, because if I died here, obviously not worth fighting, but then if I didn't die, I guess that's like a test to see where I'm at with my training or something. And then I forget who, somebody suggested like could have also been coming after Hypaxia. It could have been like her coven somehow used this, knowing that you have like issues with hell or whatever after the whole spring thing, and you stopped the demons, like they could be mad at you, and so they could have used this and be like used it to get rid of Hypaxia, to then be like, oh, she was just a tragic in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong person type deal, and then, you know, make it look suspicious. So either way, they're like, this was overall not good, because if thousands of these things are coming through the rift, that's not good. You beat 2, luckily, barely. Imagine trying to defeat way more than that, and also not having access to powers, and also you literally had 1 knife between you and barely a gun. Like, you need to start being carrying arms. And then also Rune at this point reveals to Hunt that he is now his brother, and that the Autumn King is now his father-in-law, because Bryce officially became, she officially recognized her title as a princess, to which Hunt's like, what the F is happening? And then Hunt's just laughing, he's like, you're my brother now, you're a prince. And Hunt's like, what? And Bryce is like, surprise, I didn't tell you this yet. Then we get to Hypaxia. She's in her office, and then she's talking with Therian. So apparently over the summit they actually became really close friends, and then he came up with the nickname Pax, so he just called her Pax, and she's like, you should probably stop calling me that. And he's like, but I know that you like it. And then she doesn't really deny it, so he's like, well, gotcha there. So they're talking, and she lets her guard down and talks almost pretty freely with Therian, and he kind of does the same. And so he's checking on her, and she's like, yeah, I'm doing good, you know. And he's like, cool, I'll leave now in case, just before things start getting weird in terms of how long of time we're spending together. And she's like, cool, see ya around, dude. And then he passes 3 of her coven coming in to talk to her, and he's like, yeesh, wish I could stay and support her, but I gotta go. So he goes, hops in the Istros River to make sure he keeps his fins, because, you know, they gotta be wet in the river for like a few minutes every 24 hours or however long, so that they can keep their fins and, you know, then transform so they're not stuck in a human form forever. And after that, he's like, you know what, next part of my plan, he shows up at Rune's house. He's like, hey guys, do you have room for 1 more roommate? And that is all we got for these chapters so far.